promote the family at the UN and trying to strengthen it. We have monthly meetings. November, we're going to talk about the World Summit of Sustainable Development in Doha. And December, we have a wonderful meeting celebrating family traditions, and that is included. That's in person, and you can come with treats, and that's why you should join the NGO Family Committee. Okay, I will introduce just wave, Vinnie Santora, she's my co-chair. And Elizabeth Delgado is our corresponding secretary. Tori is not visible, but she's our recording secretary. And where is Dale? Dale, there's Dale. Dale's our treasurer, who also serves as a moderator. Welcome, everybody. I don't want to take time because you really want to listen to these two speakers. So Dale, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Len, and thank you to everybody who's joining us today. We know that our lives are busy, and really appreciate you taking the time to be with us this afternoon or whatever time it might be where you are. We've got a pretty exciting opportunity today to hear from two real experts talking about a topic that I think is of great interest to us right now. Education, of course, is something that touches us all. And we've got two great speakers today to touch on that topic. I'm going to just kick right off by introducing the first of our two speakers. That's Dr. Brian Willoughby. He's a professor at Brigham Young University's School of Family Life, and he's also a research fellow at the Wheatley Institute at Brigham Young University. He's considered an international expert in the field of couples and couple and marital relationships, families, and young adult development. And he's published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters on those topics. He's a sought-after expert. He's often interviewed by journalists and seen across various print and online outlets. And his research is very commonly cited as well. He's been married for 24 years, if I understand correctly, and has 4 children. And we're very pleased to have Dr. Willoughby join us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Willoughby.
All right. Thank you very much, Dale. I really appreciate being here. Appreciate the opportunity to get to speak to this audience. Go ahead. I'm going to share some slides. Hopefully that will work. Okay. Is that working? Everyone's seeing hopefully a nice pattern slide. Okay. Well, like I said, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to address you today, and in particular to share some research about the importance of families and family structure to the educational success of children. You'll notice they put the researcher first. And so if you're hopefully not asleep by the end of this, they've got someone that'll energize you, get the practitioner, the person that's actually working with kids. But I hope that I can take a moment and share with you just how powerful some of this research is when it comes to the importance of families and educational success with children. I want to start by actually talking about why educational outcomes matter and why they're such an important indicator of success, both for children and for human flourishing just broadly. A strong education obviously is a goal for most people. It unlocks numerous resources throughout the life. And in a lot of ways, I'm guessing for most people in the audience today, education requires little justification as a marker of success. But I still think it's worth, right at the beginning of this presentation, to emphasize just how truly vital education is to the overall health and well-being of both individuals and society. Now, quick little definitional discussion real quick. When we talk about educational success, When we talk about educational outcomes in the social sciences, there's a lot of different ways that we assess them. And you're going to hear me mention most of these throughout the data and information that I'll share with you today. Academic achievement, which is how well students perform in various school subjects, is a very common measure of success during schooling. Looking more broadly across the life course, completion of high school or its equivalent and enrollment in post-secondary education are two other often key outcomes that are very commonly considered in the research as key markers of educational success. Many other scholars, particularly those that are interested in more of the social dimensions of education, also tend to examine school-based behaviors such as study habits, interactions with teachers, and peer relationships to assess educational success and well-being. So there's actually a fairly wide range of outcomes that we consider when we think about what does it mean to have educational success for children, for teenagers, and for adults. Now, regardless of the specific outcome measured, what we do know and what I'll be sharing with you today is that excelling and having success in education is one of the best predictors of adult success. Just a couple quick examples. A recent 2024 study found that for each additional year of education completed in a person's life, that person received a significant boost in overall life expectancy, which is obviously one of our key markers of success. How long do you live? We've actually found links between educational completion and life expectancy. We've also found in various studies that achievement in grade school and middle school is linked to mental health outcomes in adulthood. And other studies have found that obtaining a college or university degree can predict cognitive health and memory decades after formal school ends. And so all of this research shows just how powerful educational outcomes can be. And because of this research that's existed for many decades, many countries around the world have heavily invested in the education of their youth. And the good news is most have been succeeding. Many indicators of educational achievement around the world have been rising over the last 10 to 20 years. For example, this graph shows educational completion rates across several countries in the world and shows that the percent of teens who are completing high school or equivalent education has increased in most regions that have been studied over the past decade. So in that way, we're doing a lot of things well and doing a lot of good things in the world in terms of increasing educational success for kids. Because the link between a strong education and a variety of other indicators of health and well-being is so strong, when education becomes a priority for societies and governments, we actually tend to see almost all other markers of flourishing also increase. This graph is a little busy, but I really like it. It's looking across a range of OECD countries over a 20-year period. And in 2020, when researchers were analyzing this data, what they found is that across all of these different countries, as markers of educational achievement rose, again, like I said, generally in the last 20 years, educational achievement has been increasing. In those same countries, infant mortality, which is one of the key markers of societal health, has also been declining. And so obviously there's a lot that goes into infant mortality, but one of the strong predictors we found about infant mortality and mortality in general is education. And so education is just a vital piece of the health puzzle when it comes to health and well-being of not just children, but nations in general. And because of that, it's very important that we talk about it, that we understand how we can predict education. And it's not just about investing in the educational system and investing in schools themselves, but also in understanding the key factors that promote strong educational outcomes among children. And this is where the role of families comes into the picture. Among the many factors that influence a child's educational behaviors, achievements, and outcomes, family-related factors consistently emerge as one of the most significant. And among the aspects of one's family that matter the most, research suggests that family structure is one of the most important predictors of educational success among children. And that's where I want to focus a lot of my time on. So first, what is family structure? Family structure refers to the who of family life, the composition of family members and their relationships to one another. So step families, adoptive families, single parent families, biological married parent families, these are all examples of family structures that children may grow up in. Family structure is a very widely studied aspect of family research in child development. And the reason is because it provides the foundation upon which all other family processes, behaviors, and outcomes are often built. Family structure has been linked to children's overall health, social development, and even their likelihood of forming stable families on their own. You can think about family structure as the soil in which children grow, the thing that helps shape and nourish many other aspects of their family life. As I've illustrated on this slide, you can think about family structure as the soil in which thriving and healthy tree of childhood and an eventual adult can potentially blossom and grow. And so there's been a lot of energy in my field, particularly over the last 30 to 40 years, to understand how different types of family structures can influence different aspects of child development and a wide range of outcomes. Now, central to my remarks is this. Family structure has consistently been one of the strongest predictors of educational success among children and teenagers. And so if you kind of connect the dots, so to speak, we know that educational outcomes and success are one of the best predictors of thriving and general health and well-being in societies and nations. And one of the best predictors of educational success and outcomes with kids is family structure. Now, this link, like I said, is not new. This isn't something we have recently discovered. It's been something that we've understood for many, many years. In fact, if you go back in my field 30 years ago to 1991, there was a very pivotal study that came out from Nana Stone from Johns Hopkins University and Sarah McClanahan from Princeton University. They published a pivotal study that was looking at family structure and educational outcomes in the United States. They examined over 10,000 families in this study. And what they found is that two-parent families had children who were more likely to graduate high school than children from both single-parent families and step-parent families. They also found that children from two-parent families reported parents with higher educational aspirations for their children, more monitoring of their children's school behavior, and just better overall supervision of their children. Yet, even when they controlled for these parenting factors, so they took those factors in and accounted for them, they still found that children from two-parent families were more likely to graduate high school. This study that came out, again, many, many years ago has been cited now over 3,000 times in my field, and it was one of the early indicators that family structure was a key factor in how children did educationally. Over a decade later, so fast forward to 2004, another pivotal study came out. Two researchers analyzed 3 different nationally representative samples in the United States to examine again the role of family structure on a variety of educational outcomes in children. They found something very similar, that spending any time in a single parent family or a blended family or with no parents at all significantly decreased the likelihood of graduating high school or college. They also found in this study that living with a blended family or single parents was linked to a significant decrease in reading and math achievement. Fast forward again, 2020, so now a more recent study. In this recent study published in one of the top sociological journals, again, looking at a large nationally representative sample from the United States. In this case, a researcher from Harvard University examined educational success between the years 1985 and 2015 in the United States. And she found, again, something very similar, that spending any portion of childhood with a single mother or a non-biological parent significantly decreased the likelihood of high school completion for children. So these are 3 studies from the United States that all paint a consistent picture over the last 40 years that suggests that family structure has a strong impact on the educational lives of children. These 3 studies show that living with 2 parents has near universally been shown over 30 years of research to be associated with better educational well-being for kids. And I'm just highlighting 3 of the kind of the big marquee studies. There are dozens and dozens of other studies that have shown similar results. Now, this replicable effect is not simply based on US data. And I think that's important, particularly for this audience. I'd like to share 3 more examples from research conducted around the world, each one published in a top research journal with rigorous methods and large samples. I tried purposely to cherry pick the most rigorous large studies that I could find on this topic. But what these studies are going to help me do is illustrate just how powerful and consistently family structure has been in predicting the educational success of children, regardless of culture and nationality. So the first example comes from Italy in Europe. This is a 2019 study where researchers examined a nationally representative sample of, in this case, over 123,000 teenagers aged 15 or 16 in Italy. They were exploring the factors that influenced enrollment in upper secondary school, it's the Italian equivalent of high school, and found that family structure played a role. They actually were looking at multiple factors, but they found that one of the strongest things they found was family structure. Specifically, they found that children from two-parent biological families were more likely to enroll in upper secondary education compared to those from step families, cohabiting families, or single-parent households. These researchers step further, exploring if they could pinpoint the exact moment in the life course in a family when a child tended to excel educationally the most. What they found is that the likelihood of academic success increased when children were born into a two-parent married household, and that this success increased in likelihood for every year that a child was born after parents married, up to 3 years before leveling off, and then it stayed consistently high at that point. Not only does this suggest that having two parents was crucial to the highest likelihood of academic success, but also that being born to two consistently married parents boosted this effect. The second example I'd like to share with you comes from a completely different part of the world, in Australia. A 2020 longitudinal study, in this case, followed over 3,000 families across 6 waves of data collection, again, exploring factors that predicted academic success. Like the previous studies I've shared, they found that two-parent biological families, first, had parents who were more likely to communicate with teachers about their child's school performance compared to single parents. They also found that these same parents in two-parent married biological families were more likely than both single and cohabiting parents to be involved in the classroom. In terms of academic achievement, they found again that these same parents or same children living in two-parent married biological families reported better language literacy scores and better mathematical thinking scores than those that came from families with cohabiting parents. In essentially every single outcome that these scholars researched and explored, the best outcomes for kids educationally came from children that were in two-parent married biological families. The third and final example, again, a different part of the world, Asia this time, the Republic of Korea. 2020 study looked at over 59,000 teenagers. And again, similar question. This time looking at self-reported academic achievement in the terms of grades. They were asking these students to self-report what were their grades they were getting in school across a variety of subjects. And like the previous studies I've shared, the researchers then wanted to know what were the best predictors of high educational achievement. They found, again, that children from two-parent biological families reported better grades than those from single mother and single father families and compared to children from step families. Now, key to this particular study, and the reason I wanted to share this one, is that they also examined if these associations would disappear once a variety of control factors were included into their statistical models. These controls are common ways that social scientists like myself examine if a specific predictor is likely the real reason behind an association, or if it's simply masking the effect of other variables. Essentially, these researchers wanted to know if family structure really made a difference, or if family structure was simply a stand-in for other environmental factors in a child's life. What they found illustrates the power of family structure in the educational outcomes of children. They found that the link between two-parent biological families still existed with educational achievement, even after they controlled for gender, age, family economic status, cigarette use, vaping, alcohol consumption, internet use, sexual experience, depression, suicide ideation, stress level, and the general physical health of the child. In other words, what they were able to find in this study is that regardless of the physical health, mental health, personal behaviors, or parental and personal background of the child, living with two parents in a biological family still mattered. These last 3 studies that I've shared with you are all, again, large, nationally representative studies published in top journals from 3 different parts of the world. And they illustrate just how strong and consistent the link is between family structure and educational outcomes. Across decades of research in my field, the evidence is very, very clear. children raised by two married biological parents have the highest likelihood of educational success. In other words, what matters? Living with two biological parents matters. It is the family structure that gives children the highest likelihood of success educationally. But beyond simply living with two biological parents, living with parents who are married also matters to kids. Two biological parents who are married to each other continue to be the gold standard in terms of helping children have both educational aspirations and achievement. It is truly the gold standard of family structure research. But the question you might be asking yourself is why? Why does family structure matter so much for education? Why has the research been so consistent? Let me take just a brief moment to explain what we believe in my field are three of the common mechanisms for this relationship. We believe there's at least three core mechanisms and reasons why family structure might matter so much for children. The first is parental involvement. When parents are both biologically connected to their children and committed to a marital relationship, they tend to be more invested in their children's success. Married biological parents are often more engaged in almost all aspects of education. They're more likely to check grades, more likely to help with schoolwork, and more likely to volunteer and get involved in the school. This involvement strongly predicts positive educational outcomes. The second reason is economic resources. Two-parent married households typically have greater and more stable economic resources than other types of families, enabling parents to provide both better educational opportunities to their children and devote more time and energy to positive parenting. The ability of a married couple to pool their economic resources has long been linked to higher wealth accumulation and greater economic stability compared to other couples and types of families. And then finally, just general increased stability. General stability is one of the strongest predictors of child development and positive child outcomes in any domain. It's the most consistent variable when you're predicting anything with kids is stability in their lives. While instability can come from divorce, job loss, other life disruptions, we generally find that married two-parent households tend to be the most stable form of families. This stability allows children to focus on their education without the distractions that family turmoil and other instability can bring to their lives. Now, while understanding the link between family structure and a child's educational outcome and why these links may exist is important, I do believe that this importance takes on more urgency when paired with the fact that fewer and fewer children are now being raised in such families. This data I'm sharing on this graph is a recent analysis of vital statistics in the United States by Child Trends. And they noted that the percent of children born to unmarried women has been increasing dramatically across women from every educational background. This isn't just women in one particularly socioeconomic group or one educational background, but all women. In fact, if you look at that graph and focus just on the most educated, women who have graduated with a college degree, the rate of non-marital childbirth has essentially doubled across the 30-year stretch that they studied. And like the research linking family structure to child educational success, this is not just a phenomenon in the United States, but across the globe, with the percent of children born outside of two-parent married households increasing in almost every pocket of the world. Again, this is another little busy graph, but this is showing you data examining OECD countries across a 50-year period in terms of births, the percent of births outside of marriage. And what you can clearly see is that across almost every country studied, the percent of children born to unmarried parents has risen consistently and in many countries sharply. And I'll take some of the busyness out of this. When you isolate this just to the average across the 30 countries studied in this graph, you can see that non-marital childbirth has increased over 500% across these 30 countries during that time. What this means is that while research has shown that two-parent married households are the most likely to promote educational success among children, in many countries now, less than half of all children are being born into this type of family structure. In other words, one of our best predictors of educational success among children is slowly disappearing across the globe. But all of this would be way less useful, particularly for, I think, this audience, if family structure did not also have some strong policy implications as well. The true value for me of this research lies in that governments and institutions can actually help promote family environments that support children's success. To illustrate that, I want to go through a little thought exercise with you on this slide. I want you to take these three factors that I have on the top. These are all three things that are known to be consistent, strong predictors in the social sciences of educational outcomes for children: intelligence, household income, and, as I've been sharing with you today, family structure. Now I want you to consider the three questions on the left. Do people have agency or choice in this factor? Can intervention influence this factor? And then can policy or regulation influence this factor? Now, when it comes to intelligence, the answer across all three is a resounding no. People don't choose their intelligence. No amount of intervention or policy, at least that we're aware of right now, will influence a person's IQ. I'm not going to get into gene therapy or that in this context. Household income presents a complicated and nuanced response when you consider these questions. While people can exercise some degree of choice and agency when it comes to their education or professional trajectory that would influence their income, we also know that many people have very real constraints and limitations in their ability to gain financial resources and wealth. Interventions such as financial literacy courses, tax breaks, can only move the needle so much, and policy options to increase the income of all families and all children are obviously limited, with most governments forced to focus on policies and programs that target the income and economic resources of the most in need. But family structure is uniquely different. People actively choose their families. These are relationships of choice. They choose when and if to marry, when and how many children to have. These choices are deeply shaped by culture and therefore can be heavily influenced by intervention and policy incentives. Research, for example, on family and relationship education shows that interventions can meaningfully influence the decisions people make about marriage and family life. It's because of this link to intervention that policy can matter when it comes to family structure. Policies that promote two-parent families and marriage can make a tangible difference in the choices that people make. That means that governments and other institutions can play a role by promoting and incentivizing stable two-parent married families. Now, as I end my formal remarks, let me give a brief word about single parents. Are single-parent families and their children doomed based on this research that I've shown? Well, clearly the answer is no. Focusing on the benefits of two-parent families should never lead to marginalizing or stigmatizing other family forms. Single parents can and do raise successful, well-educated children. But the ideal is still useful because the ideal family structure provides a target for policy and education. It must be paired, though, with compassion and practical support for all families. Promoting certain family structures as an ideal for children should not villainize other types of families, and it is important that children in all types of families have access to educational resources and opportunities because of how vital that link is to their overall health. However, in closing, I do believe that ideals matter because ideals give us something to strive for. They offer young people a vision and a roadmap for building stable and thriving lives. If our goal, then, is to help every child reach their full potential, educationally and beyond, then I believe that promoting the value of being raised by two married parents and the link that that can have to educational success is an ideal worth both discussing and continuing to pursue. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. You've given us a lot to think about and a lot to consider. I'll just ask one question now, take the moderator's privilege to ask a question, and then we'll move on to Mike Oliver, and then once we're done with both speakers, we'll have time for questions at the end. I'll just note before I ask my question that if you'd like to, while you're thinking about it, enter a question into the chat box so that you don't forget it, please go ahead and do that. We might not have a chance to get to all of them at the end, but we'll go through and select those that we can. So let me ask you this. You touched on this at the end of your presentation, the idea that not every family is going to meet that ideal that you've put forward. So what would you say to parents who are not in a two-parent biological household? Where should they focus their efforts? Are there ways that they can try to mitigate And what might that look like to sort of maximize the impact of those efforts?
Yeah. I think that's where those mechanisms that I mentioned become really important, right? Is the magic of a two-parent biological married family isn't the nature of that title. It's what that oftentimes creates in a family environment. And so I think for other types of families, whether it's a blended family, a step family, or particularly a single parent, I think if you look at that list of three things I mentioned, particularly the first and the third, I think it's understanding the importance of those factors, that as a single parent, I still need to be really involved with my kids. I need to be involved with their school, with their teachers. I need to be monitoring how they're doing in school, asking questions about how they're doing in school. I need to promote a family of stability. I need to be thinking about stability in my own life choices. If I have certain career opportunities, certain other opportunities in my life, but it creates instability in my kids, what am I focusing on? What is my priority? I think the struggle a lot of times for single parents is that those things are harder. Creating stability, having time, if I'm trying to balance maybe multiple jobs as a single parent, finding that time to be involved in my kid's life is more challenging. But I think that is where the focus needs to be, is to say, what are the factors from these other types of families that I can utilize in my own life, exercise my choice and agency in doing them. And when we do that, that's where we see success. Again, we see on average success with kids and single parents is lower, not because single parents are bad parents, just because these things are a little bit harder. But I think that's where I oftentimes will encourage people to have kind of a success minded, like be the exception, be the person that's going to be at your kids' school events, that's going to be asking the questions, that's going to create that stability in their lives. When parents are very intentional in their behavior, oftentimes it's those behaviors that really matter. So I think focusing on those elements is what can really help those parents.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. And, as I said, we'll get some additional questions from our audience at the end here. We're going to turn our attention now to Dr. Michael Oliver, who has a doctorate in leadership and innovation from Arizona State University, but is a practitioner. He was the founding principal of Zaharis Elementary School, which has been recognized as one of the 25 most innovative, inspiring, and coolest schools in America. I would love to know more about how they define cool in that sense, but what a great recognition. Also recognized as an exemplary school for literacy development in the U.S. by Scholastic. He's currently the principal of Mountain View High School in Mesa, Arizona, and is well known for his interest in innovation in public education and reforming the educational system. He's an accomplished runner, an ultra marathoner, which I always find to be just stunning since I can barely run around the block. But he's completed a number of ultra marathons, including a 100-mile race. Which could be the topic of an entirely different conversation, I'm sure. Mike and his wife are the parents of 4 children and 2 grandchildren. So we're going to have the opportunity now to hear from Dr. Michael Oliver, and looking very much forward to hearing a practitioner's perspective on this. Over to you.
Thank you, Dale, but there was a grave mistake,
Oh no.
in my bio. I didn't give you the updated version. We now are the proud grandparents of 3, and little Eleanor could never be left off any list, and I'm going to reference her many times. She's 5 months old, and I read aloud to her every chance I get. And yeah, ultra marathon runners that take on 100-mile races, there's something a little off with them, and they're a little crazy. But you've got to be crazy to believe that you can reimagine the great American comprehensive high school education experience, which is what we're taking on now at Mountain View. But I am privileged to share the floor with Brian. That was fascinating, and there's a lot of common ground with what I'm going to share. And I was tagged as the practitioner, but I would submit that each of us are practitioners, because if I were to ask you to raise your hands, how many of you have children? How many of you have grandchildren? How many of you have nieces and nephews? And if there was a hand that didn't come up, although I don't believe that there was, there's a child somewhere that you care about and you love deeply, or you wouldn't be on this Zoom call this morning. But I'm going to begin something today where it calls for some interaction. And one of my best friends refers to this as the Oliver test because I've done it hundreds of times. And so never have I done it in this type of a setting or over Zoom. But I'm going to give you 90 seconds. And I'm going to ask you, even though you have multiple children that you care about in your life, think about just one for the purpose of this activity. Just think about one, dial into one, and then think about the dispositions that you want this young, striving, thriving human to develop in life. The character traits, the behaviors, whatever you want to refer to them as, the attitudes, whatever those skills or life qualities and competencies or character traits, whatever you want to refer to them as, think about what you want that striving, thriving little human to develop in life. And I'm going to give you 90 seconds. I'm going to try this. I hope it doesn't fail miserably. But if you have that trait that you would like to share, speak into the silence. I'm going to start now, and I'm really good at writing fast. So go ahead, speak into the silence. What are some of those dispositions?
So I'm just gonna, do you want people to, just to clarify, do you want people to type them in the chat box, or do you want people to just unmute and say them?
You know what? Let's try unmuting and saying them. It could be a disaster. If it does, we'll go to the chat box.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. Why don't you start us off, Dale?
Okay, I would say I'm gonna do two: grit and curiosity.
Grit and curiosity. Okay, what else do we got?
Conscientiousness.
Siblings. Affection for siblings.
Perseverance.
Empathy.
Independence.
Honesty.
Service-minded.
Competence.
We're doing great. We have about 30 more seconds. Keep it going.
Diminish the woe is me attitude.
Compassion.
Yeah.
Optimism.
Appreciation for the natural world.
Truthfulness.
Resilience.
Or honesty, I guess.
Meaningful endeavors.
Good sense of humor.
Joy, happy.
We're going to end it on that one. And there's a phenomenon, my friends, an absolute phenomenon, and it happened again today. I've done this hundreds of times, and there's one character trait that's always there. But I'm going to review with you your list, and I think I missed a couple, but not many. We came up with grit, curiosity, to be affectionate towards siblings. Boy, we could figure that one out as a parent of four. Still working on that one. Perseverance, empathy, independence, honesty, to be service-minded, competence, consideration, appreciation for the normal world, truth, to be resilient, to have take on meaningful endeavors, to have a sense of humor, and to have joy and happiness. That's quite a list, isn't it? To have as a striving, thriving human. Let me ask you this question. How are we doing in the great American K-12 public education system today in developing this type of a human? If we're doing great and we just need to keep pressing forward and we've got this, give me a thumbs up. If there's room to grow and improve, maybe even drastically, kind of give me a thumbs down. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. I've been doing this, like I said, for probably close to 30 years. I've been a building principal for 32 years, 27 of those years in the elementary school. And not one time has anybody said, you've got this, just keep going. As a matter of fact, I did this one time at the state capitol in Arizona, and there was a legislator luncheon series, and I was asked to be the keynote speaker. And I looked around the room and I thought, I knew everybody in the room, including the House Committee Chair on Education. And I thought, what am I going to do? These people can't agree on anything. If this group over here, and they were even seated on opposite sides of the aisle, if this group says that it's daylight and it's high noon and the sun is shining, this group over here is going to say, no, it's not. It's midnight and the stars are out and the moon is shining bright. But on the brochure and the agenda promoting the event, I did an impromptu Oliver test. And lo and behold, there was one that came up, and it was the very last one, just like here. Above all, we want our children to be what? There's something that we want for them in life. No matter where we live, no matter what our family circumstances are, we want our kids to be what?
Happy.
Happy. We want them to be happy. That's the only disposition, and it's a phenomenon. It was the last one today. I thought, is this going to be the first time where I've done this hundreds of times that happiness and joy didn't come up? It was the very last one. Just like it happened to be the last one when I was working on this educator, this luncheon at the state capitol. That was to serve as a mindset to get us thinking about what we want for our children. And there's one trait that and condition where in school, if it's not present, there's no joy. And if it is, we've got a shot. And Brian mentioned it many times. Where there's agency, there's joy. Where there's a lack of agency, it sucks it right out of whatever culture we're trying to create, whether it's a school or a bank or any other type of culture. Where there's agency, there's joy. We have to set kids free. We have to set them free to think big thoughts, to explore bold ideas, to develop identities. Like Brian referred to himself as a social scientist. We teach social studies in school, but do we help them develop identities that they're social scientists who could do what social scientists do and take on the unsolved problems that exist in the world? First, they have to identify them, and then they work together to create solutions, and then they plug those solutions in the world where it can make a difference. But we have a model that's been predicated on ritual compliance since the advent of the Industrial Revolution. But there's one thing is we're focusing on what can we do within the home. And you can think about your own home and what have you done to cultivate, a love of learning, to help kids be more successful in school. I'm going to start out with reading, because reading is the hub of all learning. Kids that do well in reading on the NAEP test every other year for like the last several decades, kids that do well on reading and score the highest on reading, on average, they score the highest in all the other academic disciplines too. It's not just reading. They do well in math and they do well in science. So reading is all the hub of all learning. But how do you get good at reading? And if I asked you to unmute yourselves, but I'm not for the purpose of time, you'd probably say what many others say. You get better at reading by reading. Just the same way you get better at skateboarding. You notice the kid that's really good on a skateboard, he rides that skateboard everywhere. He rides it to 7-Eleven to get the big gulp. He rides it to school. And that kid can do anything on a skateboard. It looks like it's part of who they are, like it's an appendage to them. You get better at free throw shooting by shooting free throws, and you get better at reading like you do with all other accrued skills. You get better at reading by reading. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. There is a study years ago that involved 32 different countries, 210,000 students. And the study was to focus on what correlates with success in reading. And what they found was what other studies have found. Those who read the most read the best. But what do we do in school? We spend a lot of time teaching kids how to take tests and how to score well on a standardized test. Then we spend giving them time to read. And I would submit that as schools, we do a pretty good job of teaching kids how to read. Where we fail miserably is for them to develop a love for reading. And here's why helping children develop a love for reading is so critically important. Restaurants. Took our son-in-law and little Eleanor, who's 5 months, that almost got left out of the bio today. We took our kids and our grandkids out to celebrate our son-in-law's birthday last night. We went to Spinato's Pizza. Giving Spinato's in Tempe a plug. Amazing pizza. When we go out to eat pizza, we go out to Spinato's and we order the Super Six. When we go out for Mexican food, we go to Commodore Guadalajara's, and I always get the number 8 that has the cheese enchilada, the shredded beef taco, the rice and beans, and we always get a cheese crisp. When we go out for ice cream afterwards, we always go out to the Turn. I always get 2 scoops of butter pecan. The point I'm trying to make is we repeat the things that we enjoy in life over and over again that bring us pleasure connections. But here's the problem. In school, many schools, kids don't always experience pleasure connections with school, and in particular, reading. And if a child finds more pleasure than pain in reading, he'll or she'll come back to it over and over and over again. But if the love of reading gets crushed out of them, or the love of learning, they're likely to only do it when it's a sign, and it's because they have to. Our daughter, Brittany, who I think joined in on this Zoom call, every time I go over to Brittany and our son-in-law Jesse's home, I spend time reading to our kids, our grandkids, every single time. What I'm trying to teach them is that saying goodnight to the moon is more important than whatever the big game is on. And believe me, in our home, we like to celebrate big games. Whatever the latest sell is at Amazon, more important than the dust balls that might be found under the bed, or anything else for that matter, that reading aloud to them is critically important. We've tried to create joyful conditions within our home. Our daughter, Brittany, who's now bringing babies into the world, our only supplier of grandbabies in our family, when we would get in the car and drive someplace at night, she would hold her book up when she was in the 3rd grade, because the lights from the car behind us would illuminate her book enough where she could read even when she was in the car. We would have to tell her, Brittany, we're so glad that you love reading, but you're not going to be able to take the book into the restaurant. We're going to spend time as a family. So just go ahead and leave your book here. You can read it, on the way home. She would sneak by putting pillows underneath her bed covers to make it look like she was in bed, and then she would go over to the nightlight in her room, and she would finish reading Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz Bryan. And one night after she had snuck, I didn't know. I said, "How did you do that, Brittany?" She all of a sudden I was shaking when she was in the 4th grade, and I thought, "What's going on?" In the middle of the night, she goes, "Dad, it was so good." And I said, "What was so good?" She said, "Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz Bryan." I said, "Brittany, when did you finish that? I saw that you were in bed." She goes, "I wasn't in bed. I put pillows under the bed covers to make it look like I was, so I could finish reading Esperanza Rising." But if you find more pain than pleasure with reading or learning, but I'm focusing on reading right now, you withdraw. And when a children withdraws from reading, they don't read much. And if you don't read much, you don't get better at it, because you get better at reading by reading. You see the inseparable connection between pleasure and pain and reading habits and developing a love for reading. So it's our challenge to create pleasure connections with books and reading, and build bridges between a child and print. One of the largest studies ever conducted in public education, there was a national commission that was created called Becoming a Nation of Readers years ago. And the purpose of this study was to find out what works and what doesn't in developing readers. And they looked at over 10,000 previous research studies and 2 decades of research. And what they found was there was absolutely zero correlation between worksheets and success in reading. But yet so many of our schools, it's a worksheet factory where we give kids just an endless supply of worksheets. And if it's not enough to overwhelm them with worksheets in school, we give them worksheets to take home for homework. But there's no relationship that's ever showed there's a correlation between worksheets and success in reading or learning. But what they did find, and this was their number 1 declaration that came out of this report, is that the single most important activity, not one of the most important activities, but the single most important activity for building the knowledge required for eventual success in reading is reading aloud to children. It always has been reading aloud to children. Most people don't believe me when I tell them this for 3 reasons. 1, it's really fun when you have your child or your grandbaby, like little Eleanor, sitting on your lap and you're reading aloud to them. It doesn't cost very much. and it doesn't require a master's degree to operate. But if we said you're going to have to find a $149 device, off of Amazon, the kids hate it, and it requires a doctorate degree or a master's degree to operate, it'd probably be in every home and in every classroom in America. But if the kids enjoy it, how could it possibly work if there's that much joy and fun involved? But the research shows over and over again that it does. But a lot of people ask, but how? How is my child going to get better at reading if I'm the one that's doing the reading? And here's why. Listening comprehension comes before reading comprehension. If you've never heard the word enormous, how are you going to read the word enormous? Or how are you going to use it in context when you're speaking and you're working vocabulary? But once you've heard the word in a meaningful context about a dozen times, like we hear it when we're reading aloud to children, you own that word, and it's part of your working and developing speaking vocabulary. So there's a relationship between reading aloud to children and vocabulary development. The whole time that you're reading to a child, and by the way, the research shows it should continue throughout the grades, not just when they're little. The whole time that you're reading to a child, you're feeding their listening vocabulary that a child is going to have in order to develop a speaking vocabulary, then a reading vocabulary, and finally a writing vocabulary. But it all flows out of the listening vocabulary that is fostered and developed and driven by reading aloud to children. Here's another reason why it's so critically important. Let's say that you're on this Zoom call today and that you have a child that is Clark Noble, my little grandson's age, and that he is in, let's say, first grade. That first grader might be reading at a first grade level. But here's a question for you. It's a rhetorical question. You don't need to answer. If Clark is reading at a first grade level, what level is he listening at? Where is his listening comprehension? Well, this is something really fascinating to me. While he might be reading at a first grade level, he's listening at least a fourth grade level. And while he might be able to only read a book like Hop on Pop by Dr. Seuss, he's capable of listening to books like Charlotte's Web or Where the Red Fern Grows or a multitude of other novels. And what this does, it whets their appetite. It whets their appetite for story in their life, and that I want to read a book like that one day on my own. I keep mentioning little Eleanor. I love that little girl. I go through withdrawals if I go a day without seeing her. I could never move out of state because I've got to be close to Eleanor, Clark, and Vera, our grandbabies. Eleanor's 5 months old. There's a book. It's called Babies Need Books. And within this book, the big theme is that the most critical stage in a child's development with their brain is like the first 2 years of their life journey, from 0 to 2, during their infancy and toddler years. And that they have synapses. And the synapses in the brain circuitry, they either form or they do not during those first 2 years. And if those synapses link, the brain is wired. There's a circuitry that's developed, and these kids are wired for learning, and it'll carry out throughout their lives. If it's not, and those synapses do not connect, it's not like they can't learn, but it's going to be a lot more challenging for them. And the best way to develop the synapses is to have auditory and visual cues combined. And guess what the book Babies Need Books suggests? The way to do that? Reading aloud to children. Because as you're reading to them, they see the cues on the page, they hear the words, and it helps form those synapses. So you're going to think I'm a little strange when I tell you this, but when our grandbabies were born, and I've been in the room, wasn't for the one that was born during COVID, that was Clark, but our 4 babies and my grandchildren, they get their first read aloud before they get their APGAR score, because I want them to come into the world with a love for story, the power of story. So listening comprehension is far more developed than reading comprehension. So we can read them stories We could read them Harry Potter when they could never navigate through that book on their own. It whets their appetite and it develops a love for reading. Books that play with language develop phonemic awareness, and parents can do this better than anybody. Developing a love for reading, reading aloud to them. They can do this better than anybody. Books that play with language. Every time I see Eleanor, and when she sees this, she's probably thinking, is Grampy ever going to leave this alone? And the answer is no. When I see her, I say, Eleanor, I love you so much. And skit, scat, skittle-doot, flip-flop, flee. Everybody's running to the coconut tree. Mamas and papas and uncles and aunts hug their little dears, then dust their pants. And when I say that, she's only 5. She's not yet spoken her first word, but she lights up. And what she's learning is that you can play with words, you can play with sounds, you can play with language. Even though, remember that dinosaur, Barney, the purple dinosaur? That guy drove me nuts. And we had a doll in our home, and it would go off, and it would speak into the silence when the batteries would go off, and it would say, "You're super duper." Or, "Can you make a noise like a motorcycle? Vroom, vroom." But that dinosaur helped with phonemic awareness when he would sing, "I like to eat, 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 eeples and bananas," or "apples and bananas," or "ooples and banunus." When you read books that play with language, like a lot of the Dr. Seuss books, you help kids understand, little toddlers understand that there's a relationship between sounds and language and print. So where are the best Winter Olympics teams? Where are they found? Every year I think we have a year coming up where we're going to have the Winter Olympics in 2026. The ones that win all the medals in skiing and hockey, they come from countries like Finland and Canada and Austria, where there's a snow climate. It's all about the climate. Rarely do you see an Israeli hockey team, winning the gold medal. It's about the climate. So we need to create a climate for literacy, and books are so incredibly important in the home. Not just reading aloud to children, but accessibility to books. There was a study once that showed that kids that are struggling readers, they have on the average in their home of 0.5 books. 0.5 books in their home library. Now, since you can't have half a book unless it was ripped in half, it means every other struggling reader has a book, and every other struggling reader has 0 books at all in the home. And the kids that were prosperous readers, that were thriving readers, they had on the average of over 200 books in their home. And it's like, well, there's a lot of families that live in poverty. They don't have the money to buy the books. One of the greatest advent of any arising cultures in our country is the library. The library, where books are free. You can check out 25 at a time. Take them to the library. Let them pick out books of their own choosing. Brian mentioned agency several times, where kids are free to choose their book. They might pick out one they don't like. They might pick out one that's too difficult to read that you might have to read aloud to them. Or they might pick out one that says, nope, not interested after the first page. But taking them to the library to provide books in their life. And again, why spend so much time on reading when a child is good at reading and a child loves to read? It changes everything. Now, let's talk about accountability. Every year, kids are in school for 900 hours a year. Let's look at the kindergarten teacher. Kindergarten teacher had that student that you were thinking about today at some point, where we'll have him or her at some point for 900 hours. A lot had better happen in that 900 hours. That teacher needs to be held accountable. During that same year, a child is at home for 7,800 hours a year. So if we want to hold teachers accountable, we need to hold ourselves accountable. And who should have the greatest degree of accountability? The teacher that has them for 900 hours, or the teacher that has them for almost 8,000 hours, because we're all practitioners, whether we're a teacher, whether we're a parent or a grandparent. That's the significance that parents have in the educational process. Now, I mentioned that schools do a pretty good job of teaching a child how to read, but sometimes we do a very, very poor job of helping them develop a love for reading. We far too often crush the love of reading right out of them, and with the things that we do that we call literacy in a place called school. Furthermore, we do the same thing with learning. I'm going to share this with you. It's a paradox of schooling. There was a kindergarten parent. She came into me my first to see me my first year at Alma Elementary School when I was a first year principal, barely turned 30. And she said, Mike, we have to talk. And I said, sure, come on in. What can we do? She said, I sent you my little girl. And I can't remember her name, but she said, I sent you my little girl, eager to learn. She's smart. She has an identity that she's smart. She loves life. She loves learning. She's curious. She's creative. She loves numbers. And she loves learning. She goes, all I ask is for you to return her to me in the same condition. And I said to her, are we not returning her to you in the same condition? And she said, no, you're crushing the love of learning right out of her. So while school sometimes, because it's built on a model of compliance and we're so driven by test scores and the importance of a child performing greater on a standardized test sometimes is greater than them developing a love for learning and reading, unfortunately. But we can compensate for that in the home. We can help children to be curious. By the way, there is a study produced by Newsweek, wasn't conducted by Newsweek, but it was called the Creativity Crisis. And what they found was that kindergartners start school with vast reservoirs of creativity. And so as they progress in school, every year they followed students that they were participating in the study, and they found that year by year, there was a reduction in their creativity. Every year they were losing more and more creativity, and the way that they tested this every single year. To by the time they graduated from high school, they started out with vast reservoirs of creativity. And by the time they graduated, they hardly had any creativity at all. Sometimes school, they crush it right out of them. We need within our homes to create a culture of curiosity where we ask children what they're wondering about, not just what they know. We need to encourage them to build, to draw, to write, to explore, to play, to make something, not only to consume learning, but to create. We have to help them think that they're agents in the world around them, that they can choose, that they can create, that they can identify the unsolved problems that exist, take them on and fail, because it helps. We can help them see that failure is not the opposite of learning. Failure is learning. And a home that celebrates curiosity creates learners who cannot be crushed by any system, even a place called school, because their desire to understand is self-sustaining. Brian touched on this, the power of family time. Last night when we went to Spinato's, we sat at a round table, and I thought of someone named Dr. Harry Wong, who wrote a book called The First Few Days of School years ago. And he talked about how within the Chinese culture, if you go into Chinese restaurants, there are always round tables because they foster conversation. The lazy Susan was invented by the Chinese, where you can put all the main dishes on that lazy Susan and rotate it around, but they'll stay and they'll meet for hours where they enculturate their children with their culture at the dinner table. It's where they pass on their culture from one generation to next, where they listen, where they share, where they learn to disagree respectfully, where they see that their opinions have worth. So much of that is fostered at the dinner table by reading together, by talking before the kids go to bed. It teaches them that they belong to something bigger than themselves. To model lifelong learning, it's so critically important that they see us reading, that they see that we're curious, that we don't know the answer to everything. When they ask the question that we don't have the answer to, we need to respond, I don't know, but let's see if we can find out. As I wrap it up here, home and school can be allies, not just adversaries, but allies in this work. Parents don't have to be reduced to spectators in education. They can be co-architects of it. Schools, we have a responsibility not only to measure learning, but we must listen to how learning feels for the children that we serve. We need to love and revere children to help them develop identities, to see that they're agentic learners, that their voices have a place in the world. When we move together in harmony, when we have shared values of curiosity, creativity, and compassion, and the child stands at the center, there's nothing that we can't do, and there's no limitations for the potential of a child. Brian mentioned, what about the single parent? I'm almost 100% sure there's a single parent on this call, probably several. Dr. Ben Carson, the world's leading pediatric brain surgeon, ran for president. He is an incredible man. He grew up in a home with a single parent, a mother in the most impoverished community in Detroit. Mother couldn't even read. She wasn't literate, but she would take a young Dr. Ben Carson to the window and she'd say, "Look out there, Ben, look out there. You see those kids out there playing? You're never going to be one of them if you don't do your homework. And I want you to read a book and I want you to tell me about it when you're done." He didn't know his mother couldn't read until years later. So he would read a book and then they would talk about the book. But this mother, who probably worked 2 jobs, made learning a priority. It wasn't a time problem, it was a priority problem. We all got the same 24 hours in life yesterday. The only ones that didn't had a really bad day yesterday. When we eat together, when we talk together with our children, when we learn together, we ignite curiosity. We protect the love of learning. When we fill our children's life with stories so good they simply have to be told. When we value creativity and belonging, then schools no longer need to repair what the world has broken. They can build on what the home has beautifully begun. And I'm going to leave you with this. It's one of my favorite poems. It'll only take about 30 seconds. It's called The Reading Mother, or it could be The Reading Father. If you're a father, just plug father in here, by Strickland Gilliland years ago. I had a mother who read to me sagas of pirates who scoured the sea, cutlasses clenched in their yellow teeth, blackbirds stowed in the hold beneath. I had a mother who read me lays of ancient and gallant and golden days, stories of Marmion and Ivanhoe, which every boy has the right to know. I had a mother who read me tales of Gellick the Hound of the hills of Wales, true to his trust till his tragic death, faithfulness blent with his final breath. I had a mother who read me the things that wholesome life to the boy heart brings, stories that stir with an upward touch. Oh, that each mother of boys were such. You may have tangible wealth untold, caskets of jewels and coffers of gold, but richer than I, you can never be, for I had a mother who read to me. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I enjoyed your references to many of the books that I've enjoyed myself and enjoyed reading to my own kids over the years. I'm going to again exercise the moderator's prerogative to ask you a question, but before I do, I just want to do 2 things quickly. First, I noted that we have Renata Kazmerska on the call with us, who is an important person for us and for many of the people on the call. She's the focal point on the family at the UN's Division for Inclusive Social Development. We're very pleased to have her join us today. And then second, as you're thinking about questions, please try to condense them, keep them relatively brief, so that there's a question. We've all been at those events where somebody says, "Oh, I have a question," and they talk for 5 minutes, and by the end, you're thinking, "What was the question?" So please try to keep your questions brief. You can put them in the chat or come off mute and raise your hand, please, and then come off mute when I recognize you. And then I'll ask the same thing to Mike and to Brian. If you can try to keep your responses concise so that we can get to as many questions as possible, that would be great. So my question to you, Mike, is all these years in schools and leading in schools, have you found that there's one particular thing that really helps get parents to read to their children? Is there an intervention you've found or some way that you've really been able to be successful in having that happen?
As I mentioned, I'm a career elementary educator, and we developed a school, built it from the ground up, didn't inherit it where we had to transform it. We created it from the ground up, and it drew people in all over the world. It was a different version of school, and the way I could best describe it is we didn't ask kids to do things that you never see them do outside of school. Everything in learning had to be real. It was a model of inquiry. But we created a culture. First, we used real books in teaching reading. It's a lot harder than using the reading textbooks that are anthologies that just have excerpts of books. But we had bedtime stories night where the kids would come and they would wear their pajamas, and they would bring their teddy bears, and every teacher would be in their classrooms and we would read them stories. I would always read one to the entire school community at first, and then afterwards we would talk about these things. It's kind of a well-kept secret. Not a lot of parents know that the greatest thing they can do isn't to buy the greatest technology device or the latest computer. The best thing they could do is go to the library and get books and read them aloud to their children. I've been telling this to my daughter and son-in-law every time I go over there. And I literally brought a truckload of books over there one day for these grandbabies. And I asked them, are you reading aloud to them every day? Don't just read aloud to them, only read aloud to them on the same days that you feed them or that end in Y. You've got to read aloud. Think food, shelter, safety, books. Are you reading to them every day like their lives depend upon it? Because it does. But most people don't know that inseparable connection between the power of story, literacy learning, literacy loving, and books being read aloud to them that fosters all those other skills that they need to be successful readers. Most people don't know. So the schools that I've been at and other schools that I know that are leading schools, they teach those principles. They have book drives. If they're in a community that's high poverty, they find ways to bring books to give to kids. If it's important enough, there's a way to make it happen. And there's a lot of skills. There's a lot of schools that do. But unfortunately, I think a lot of parents don't realize how critical, that part of the culture of home is.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Oliver. While people are gathering their thoughts, I'll take one out of the chat here from Maisha Kogel. I'm sorry if I didn't get the name exactly right. What does the research say? I think this is for you, Dr. Willoughby, Brian. What does the research say about the dynamics of the marital relationships effect on child's education? Factors such as domestic violence, mental health struggle of one or both the parents, etc. Is there a difference if one of the or both of the parents have been married before?
Yeah, so it's kind of two questions there. I think when you think about some of those dynamics and processes, if I go back to that tree metaphor that I showed in one of my slides, and you think about family structure is the soil, this is really talking about kind of the trunk of that tree. That all that family structure does is it does set the probable foundation of what family life is like, but then the realities of day-to-day family life can involve domestic violence, interpersonal conflict, a range of other things. And so it's really the combination of both of those things that's going to bear good fruit when it comes to kids across all sorts of different domains. Is, like I said, the family structure creates the most probable soil that things can grow, but then we have to create a healthy family dynamic within that soil, healthy processes, good modeling for kids about healthy relationships that creates that stability and involvement in some of those other factors. So those things really matter as well. It's just, as I said, the family structures are what kind of create the likely probability of those other factors happening. In terms of remarriage and previous marriages, they don't really come up a lot in the educational research. Again, biological parents and married parents are kind of the two things that really are prominent in that research. Now, where there's a slight connection is that remarriages, second order marriages are a little bit less stable in general, on average, than first marriages. And so the probability of staying continually married is a little bit lower when one or both people has had previous relationship experiences. And then you also have the potential for step families. As I think I mentioned, several of the research studies have suggested that step families as a family structure generally have a little bit more risk involved when it comes to educational outcomes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let's see. I'm happy to, if anyone would
Thank
like
you.
to come off mute and ask a question, please go ahead. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought somebody was getting. You were just saying thank you for answering the question. I see. Okay, I think Eve, you've got a question.
Yes, I'm happy to ask the question about speaking skills. I was recently in London, and one of the contacts I made there was part of an initiative in the legislature, I forget what they call it, Parliament, to improve not just literacy and numeracy, but a new word for me, oracy. And I wonder what schools are doing. Maybe this is a question for you, Mr. Oliver, in encouraging speaking skills.
Well, first, a lot of people say that education is broken. And I always respond back with, it is absolutely not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is it was designed back during the Industrial Revolution when the aim was to put kids that come out of high school into the factories where 95% of the jobs were back then. The problem we have, and it's still doing that, even though most of those jobs no longer exist. So it's not that it's broken. It's just all the other industries on the planet have evolved, but yet schools have not. We put kids in a place called school where they often sit in rows of desks. They stare at the backs of each other's heads. They're postured as passive receivers of information, where a teacher stands at the front of the room, where they have very little voice. And their job is to receive and then reproduce to prove that they learn. And there's very little opportunity for them to exercise their voices. The schools that I've led through the years, and for the last two, it's been at Zaharis Elementary and Mountain View. We give kids opportunities to do real world work. What does that look like in literacy learning? Everybody in this group is probably a member of some type of a book club, but yet we don't give kids opportunities to read books and to create a new meaning by interrogating those books and doing what we do outside of school. When kids work together in interdisciplinary fashions, where the disciplines all spill into each other, where they're taking on unsolved problems, when they're thinking big thoughts, when they're working together and doing the type of work that we see outside of school, their speaking skills develop because they practice them over and over and over again. And not only do they develop that form of oracy, but they gain confidence with it. And then they recognize that their voice has power and place and purpose. And it's just like how reading is an accrued skill, so is speaking. And the more we do, the better we get at it. But in school, their voices are stifled and agency isn't fostered, it's limited. So the best way to develop that is by giving them places where their voice can take flight and where they can see that it has not only a place and purpose. We see, and last thing I'll say in response to this question, is educators do a really good job of saying we are preparing kids for the real world. Have you ever heard that? Not if you have. That irritates me. It's nails on the chalkboard. Breaking news flash. Mike Oliver reporting right here to the United Nations. School is the real world, and it can be so much better, but it has to be relevant to the world outside of school. And if it's not, what's the point? That's what we're doing at this school I'm at right now. It's a revolution. It's not a school I'm leading. It's a revolution. We are reimagining the great American comprehensive high school education system with 3,500 teachers or kids and 185 teachers to give kids that voice and that opportunity to do real world work. So there's a correlation between their lives at school and their futures.
Thank you for such a great question and for the response. I'm going to grab a question out of the chat here for you, Brian, and I'm actually going to edit it slightly just to add on a little bit. But Marcia asked, you mentioned policy can most easily impact family structures out of your various categories. I'm curious what policies you might suggest for positively impacting family structure. And I would maybe just sharpen that a little bit and say, if you could only enact one policy, what might that be?
You made the question infinitely harder.
Of course,
alteration.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll start broad and talk about a couple different options, and then maybe answer your question about which one at least resonates with me the most. I think there's a variety of different options here, and I'm going to categorize them into what I'd say direct policy intervention and indirect policy intervention. Just real quick on the indirect side. There's a lot of policy, I think, that isn't directly focused on family formation and family structure that still matters. Because, for example, a lot of kids are falling into digital alternatives, things like pornography, AI companions, that I think policy can make a real difference. And obviously, that's not directly connected to family structure decisions, but I think do indirectly influence some of those family decisions. On a direct standpoint, obviously, you have a lot of policy interventions and regulations that can incentivize things like marriage, whether that's tax breaks, other financial incentives that governments can put in place that say essentially that we want to incentivize people to have these types of families. We know these types of families lead to better health, societal health, physical health, mental health. Therefore, we want to incentivize people into these types of relationships. That's, kind of a typical financial type policy. But I think there's also social norms policies meaning that we know that social norms campaignings at a high level, governmental level, can matter. In the United States, probably the best classic example is the Just Say No to Drugs campaign, where we're sending clear societal norm messaging to kids. And I think you can do that when it comes to families and family policies, to talk about the ideals of marital childbirth, to talk about the ideals of marriage, to educate people about the benefits. The best kept secret in social science, kind of ironically, is that married people still do better, are happier, they're healthier, they live longer across every outcome than single people. But most people don't know that. They think that marriage is just a choice. Having kids whenever you want is just a choice that doesn't really impact things, when we know from research that it does. So I think some of those social norms, policies that can be put in place, that can put some money and energy into sending those cultural messages is important. And then I think more directly in this, I've said this one to last because I think it's my answer to your question, is I think policy can really matter when we invest in the skills needed to make informed decisions about family formation and relationships. One of the things I talk a lot about is that here in the United States, we invest a lot in terms of teaching kids things like math and science, social studies, reading, all these great things. We also invest in teaching them how to drive a car, in driver's education, and we invest almost nothing in teaching relationship skills to our kids. There's no policies in place in the United States. There's nothing that really exists across almost any educational system about how to have healthy dating relationships, healthy marital or family relationships, or parenting skills. And I think that speaks to what we value. And so if we really value these things, I think that's a very direct way, a very clear way that we can implement some policy and put some finances and resources behind teaching kids how to have informed decisions about how to make good dating and fertility decisions in their life, help them understand what the ideal looks like and why it matters. And I think we can make a big difference in some of those areas.
All right, thanks, Brian. Let me pause here and see if there's anyone outside of the chat who would like to ask a question. Anybody want to come off mute? Okay, then I will come back and pull another one from the chat here. I see that Mike, you answered this somewhat in the chat already, but I would like to hear a bit more about what the coolest school was and why. So maybe give us what did that mean?
I'll tell you what it meant to the kids. We got a lot of recognition, and people came from all over the world. It was listed by Scholastic at one point as the exemplary school for literacy development in the country. But the kids only cared about the coolest school in America tag that they earned. And it was Parent and Child magazine, and there were 25 schools. And I can't recall exactly what the criteria was, but they were looking for schools where kids were deeply engaged with real world work, where learning was elevated to life, where they were taking on meaningful pursuits, where the classrooms fostered not only a love for learning, but a voice, for children. Those were some of the things I remember that they said they were looking at. And when they found our school, we checked those boxes.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. All right, we're nearly out of time. I'm just going to say to give each of you, and why don't we start with you, Mike, and then go and we'll let Brian have the last word. But if just in 30 seconds, if you want, there's just one thing you want people to remember, what would that be? So to you, Mike, one thing that you want everybody on this call to remember, what would it be?
That I believe this is the most sacred and important work that there is in the world. If I didn't need the money, and I do, I would do it for free. We have a divided world that we live in. I think for us to have it, the only hope that we have is embedded within a place called school. It could be so much better, that we need to work in concert with each other. This isn't an isolated problem. It's something that we need to solve together as a community. I think the first school is within the home. And what we do in those first 5 years before they start school is as important as the last 5, or even more so. And that we don't have to work in silos with each other. I spent a lot of time talking about reading. And I know that people aren't going to remember everything that we said, but I hope that people that were here today would remember that there's a relationship between success in school and how well kids read, and how well kids read could largely be influenced and affected by what happens within the home, by reading aloud to them, providing them with access to books, helping them to be curious, and fostering a love for learning. Because if you're not careful, school will do a really good job of crushing that right out of them.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And over to you, Brian.
Yeah, in many ways, I want to echo what Michael's saying, that during his presentation, he shared some hours about how much time kids are spending in school and in the home. And I think it's really important to understand that no matter what's happening in the school systems, the most important things that are going to happen to a child in terms of their educational success are happening in the home, within families. And I think reminding ourselves just how vitally important that home environment is, how vitally important families are to kids and their well-being is a really important message. And that cuts across everything, education and all sorts of different outcomes. The vital importance that parents play and what they're doing with their kids, as Michael said, reading to them out loud, spending time with them, having time with both parents, doing family activities. We live in a world where family time is decreasing, even though our free time is actually increasing. And I think the reminding us just how vitally important parent role the parents and families play in the educational success of their kids is very important.
Okay. Well, Dr. Brian Willoughby, Dr. Michael Oliver, it's been a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you all for joining us. And I'll just wrap up with a quick thank you to Lynn and to Vinny, our co-chairs at the NGO Committee on the Family, and especially to Marcia Barlow, who is also on the executive committee and took the lead on organizing our session today. Thank you all for joining us, and it usually takes us a few days, but we will put the recording up on our website once we get it edited a little bit to clip off the beginning and the end, and then we'll get it posted up on the website if you'd like to